that Imam Shatibi mentioned, or the Imam al-Kattani, who saw in a dream that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you say 40 times every day, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, La ilaha illa anta, subhanaka, La ilaha illa anta. If you say that 40 times, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, La ilaha illa anta. If you say that, he said your heart won't die. So he said that people, and this is a problem because there are dhikrs that people have received in dreams. And so people will say, that's not mansus, that there's no sharia, that there's nothing from the Prophet ﷺ that said that. And this is a khilaf issue. Some of the ulama said, that they say the ibadat are tawqifiyah. And so you can't do any, and the ibadat are tawqifiyah. But dhikr is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا. Dhikr is mutlaq. So as long as the sigha is in our tradition, it's not a bid'ah, like things saying subhanaka or ya hayyu ya qayyum, la ilaha illa anta, those type things, we have them in our religion. Adding a number to them, some of the ulama said that that's not acceptable. What he's saying is that other scholars said that it was permissible to do that from like a dream if he had it. It's important though that people understand that those things are not, there's the nadab, the recommended act is the dhikr. And if something was revealed to somebody through a dream or something like that, it's probably personally for him to do that. Some of the shuyukh have awrad and things like that they put together, as long as they're all from the tradition. And we know that some of the Sahaba had their own du'as. And the Prophet ﷺ aqarrahum ala dhalika. Like the man who the Prophet ﷺ was praying and he heard him say, when he said, Rabbana wa lakal hamd, hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi, that was from one of the Sahaba. And the Prophet ﷺ looked at him and he said, where did you get that from? And he said, it was just something I wanted to say. And the Prophet said that he heard the angels responding to that. So some of the ulama, in Maliki madhab, they don't say that. But in some of the madhabs, they do say that from that Sahabi. Now, obviously, the Prophet aqarrahu ala dhalika, and so it's from sunnah to taqreer, because there's a sunnah of taqreer where the Prophet says something is acceptable, then it's a sunnah to do it even though he might not have initiated it. And there are many examples of that. But you can make dua in the prayer. Like when you're in sajda, you can say your du'as. The best ones to say are the ones the Prophet ﷺ said. But you can say, Allahumma wafiqni lima tuhibbu. There's different things. So this is the point that he's making. As long as it's from the acceptable dhikrs, then there are ways that these have been transmitted, and people should not get troubled by those things. And then there are things that are he said about certain things, like Umar radiallahu anhu, الخروج عن الخلاء من غير وضوء ومنها ما هو من الراحات والعادات. That there are things that people do that are just customary, they're norms or practices that they do. And what he says is that the furthest that we could say about many of these things is that he's ظالم لنفسه, he could be doing something better. But he said, I would prefer to say he's muqtasid because he's doing something permitted. But we certainly shouldn't say that he's mubtadi' or dal. Right? We shouldn't go to that extreme. And he makes mention about certain things that people would do before they got out of their prayer, that they added or something like that. And again, he says that some of these things are bid'ah madhmuma, because the reality of a bid'ah is, and this is important, the reality of a bid'ah madhmuma is what causes the sunnah to die. So if you're leaving something of the sunnah and doing something that's not of the sunnah, and that by doing that thing, you're actually causing the sunnah to die, that's a bid'ah madhmuma. Because in that situation, there is a sunnah, and you're replacing it with a bid'ah. And so that's an important distinction. And then he said, إِن تَرَكَ ذَلِكَ لِمَا هُوَ أَرْفَعُ. But if they leave those things to what's more beneficial, or خَيْرٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ, فهو سابق بالخيرات وإن تركها لأخس منها خوف آفة من خارج يعمل بذلك يدا على الله أن تعتقد العامة ما أنا في الحي حتى أنسب. So he says that if you do something that you could have done something, you're doing something better, then that's the sabiqun bil khairat. So you've left something that is less worthy and you're doing something more worthy. And then he says, فَهُوَ كَقَوْلِ الْعَامَّةِ حَيْرٌ بِرُوحِهِ مُضِلٌ لِغَيْرِهِ. The one who's confused in his own soul, he's going to lead others astray. مستهزئ بنظرائه مدخل على الناس شغبا في دينهم وحيرة في قلوبهم وسوء ظن في مقلديهم كما يأتي للشيخ ابن السراج لا سيما إن كان هو المتروك من قبيل المشروع الذي لا يكون أبدا أحط من المباح ومن نظره لزمه ولو أوصى بجزاء عليه لوجب تنفيذ الوصية. So again, he's talking about, things that people do, that they practice in and of themselves from things that are acceptable. لا يكون أبدا أحط من المباح. You can't put them lower than mubah. So they might not be the best things to do, but you shouldn't in any way attack them for doing them. And he says that سيأتي أيضا للأئمة الذين لا ينعقد للمسلمين إجماع بدونهم من شافعية ومالكية أن ما اختلف في مشروعيته فقال بعض الأئمة إنه مكروه وقال بعضهم إنه مستحب إن فعل ذلك أفضل وقال عز ابن عبد السلام وذلك كرفع اليدين وقال إنما قلنا هذا لأن الشرع يحتاط لفعل المندوبات كما يحتاط لفعل الواجبات. So he's saying that if there's a difference of its permissibility or not, then some of the imams, for instance, said it was makruh, not encouraged, and others said it was mustahab, it was encouraged. He said, "Inna fi'la dhalika afdal." To do it is actually better in that type of situation because it's an area of difference of opinion. I'll give you an example. Reading Quran for dead people. That's a khilaf issue. The majority of ulama say it's permissible. Some say that it's not. In that situation, what Ibn Rushd said, this is an ikhtilaf in the rahmah of Allah. The difference here is about the rahmah of Allah. Can you help the dead with your recitation and give it to them or not? He's saying it's better to err on the side of rahmah. That yes, that will benefit that person. So here's an example where the imams differed, but they said, this is a difference about Allah's mercy. And we should encourage people to help the dead. Because one of the things of our ummah, and Martin Links has a beautiful poem about religions and remembering the dead. Because this is something that we do, we remember the dead. And this is why Muslims always say, when they mention dead people, Rahimahu Allah. Because those things help those people. And so we don't forget that we're going to hope that people will yatarahmu alayna after we die, they'll actually say those things. Because these are dua for these people. The Prophet ﷺ said, if somebody dies and you get enough people to do shafa'ah for him, 40 people with good hearts, and they pray over him, he'll be forgiven. And this is why for janazah, it's encouraged to have a lot of people to come and pray janazah because it's going to help these people. So we should think about the dead and remember the dead. And when we do, we say rahimahullah, especially our parents or our, and others. The righteous. Like people, if you mention the Prophet ﷺ's name, you should say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He said, it's enough to call a man a miser who hears my name and doesn't give me the benedictions. Because, and it's not him boasting, it's not like, look at all I've done for you, but look at all he's done for us. Right? He's not saying that to us. He's saying that person who can mention my name without saying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this man has not contemplated what I did for him. And the same is true for the great ulama. Radiyallahu anhu, qaddasallahu sirruhu, rahimuhu Allah. We say these things as an act of gratitude. Man lam yashkur nas lam yashkurillah. If you haven't shown gratitude towards people, you certainly haven't shown gratitude towards Allah, because those people are the asbab by which Allah has given you good. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. And so he said, like raising the hands, for instance, in the dua, the mawlid is an example of that. Ikhtilaf issue, the majority said it was permissible, a minority said that it was a bid'ah. That's fine. If people don't want to do it, they don't do it. There's certainly those people, and to be fair, those people are not doing it because they want to follow the Prophet ﷺ. So what's the impulse behind them not doing the mawlid is not because they don't love the Prophet or don't want to celebrate the Prophet. It's because they want to follow the Prophet, and they said, he didn't tell us to do this. And the mas'alatu tark is a khilaf issue. If he didn't do something, some of the ulama said you shouldn't do it. But other ulama said, no, it just meant that he left it up to you. So these are masail that are related to what's called tark. They're issues related to tark. And Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayy wrote an extraordinary book called Al-Mashahid min al-Maqasid about this very issue. That many things have been left to us. You can't add 5 rakats to dhuhr. That is bid'ah muharrama. But if you want to pray 20 rakats before dhuhr, it's nafilah. The Prophet's practice was 4 before and 4 after. But there's nothing that says you can't pray 20 if you want to pray 20 and you have the time. So there's things that you can do as long as you understand the Prophet prayed 4. There's things that you can do that are left for us. You could pray 100 rakats at night. But the sunnah is 8 rakats or 10 rakats. But you could pray 100 if you want. You can add more. Those things are left to you. That's tark. The same with the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ recited the Quran. He said, don't recite it in more than 3 days. Right? So, but some of the great scholars recited the Quran in one night. And that's warid, even on some of the Sahaba. But the Prophet ﷺ said, don't do it because you won't understand it that way. And part of the purpose of the Quran is tadabbur. The best is to do it every month, once a month. That's the tradition. That's why there's 30 hizb, 1 hizb a day. That was the tradition of many Muslims around the Muslim world, was to do a hizb. And then they did 60 juz. So you do a juz in the morning, a juz in the evening, a juz at fajr, a juz at asr. They used to do it after asr because they often did it in the masjid in group recitation like they do in Morocco. That's also masaratu tark. The Prophet ﷺ did not do it in group recitation, but there's no dalil that it's prohibited to do it in group recitation. What Ibn Mas'ud said in that tradition is something different, because the hadith in Sahih Muslim says, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمًا فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بِيُوتِ اللَّهِ يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ. That if a group gets together in a house from the houses of Allah and recites the Quran together, then the Prophet ﷺ said that the sakina will come down on them. Right? نَزَلَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّكِينَةُ وَغَشِيَتْهُمُ الرَّحْمَةُ وَحَفَّتْهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ وَذَكَرُهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَنْ عِنْدَهُ. So that's the blessing of doing that. And so traditionally they would gather and recite. And Imam al-Nawawi, one of the great muttabi'in, I mean he's one of the great followers of the Sunnah, Imam Nawawi said in his book on the Quran that gathering together to recite the Quran in a group is fadila. وَفَاضِلٌ مَنْ دَعَى إِلَيْهَا. It's a virtuous act, and he is virtuous who calls people to do that. You know, these things, traditionally people did these things because much of it, when we gather together, if there's no dhikr, there's no real barakah in the gathering. There should be some dhikr in the gathering when you get together to talk about God, to remind each other. Many people, when they get together, it's ghiba, it's namima, it's zur, it's kidhib, it's all these horrible, bad qualities of the tongue. And so this is what he's saying. And then he says, Imam al-Qarafi said, وَلِيَنَا الْقَائِلْ بِالشَّرْعِيَّةِ مُثْبِتٌ لِأَمْرٍ وَلَمْ يَطَّلِعْ عَلَيْهِ النَّافِي وَالْمُثْبِتْ مُقَدَّمٌ قَالَ كَتَعَارَضَ الْبَيِّنَاتِ. So, this is from Imam al-Qarafi, who wrote a very important book called Furuq. And he said the one who's saying that this is from the Sharia is called a muthbit. He's asserting that an act is from the Sharia. And the one, لِأَمْرٍ لَمْ يَطَّلِعْ عَلَيْهِ النَّافِي. And he's saying it often because of something that the one negating it is unaware of. So for instance, if somebody says, you can't sit in a circle and do dhikr together, because he knows the hadith, the athar on Ibn Mas'ud, from Ibn Mas'ud. But the other one looked at the hadith, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بِيُوتِ اللَّهِ. And so he says, this is a dalil that you can do it. It's a proof that you can do it. So what he says is the muthbit is muqaddam ala nafi, generally. The one asserting something is taken before the one negating. Unless obviously the dalil is very strong. But generally when the adillah when there's ta'arud, then you look at the muthbit.